Hello and welcome back. I think today we'll get back to our regular program and talk a little bit about books because that's my favorite thing to do with this. As much as I like to talk about my past and myself, I love talking about myself. I don't want to make this stream all about me. It's a little bit more challenging for me to use this as a medium with which I can kind of explore the books that I read and share them as well, because I know that a lot of people would like to read, but they just don't have very much time for it, and I don't either. I don't really have time to read myself, but when I do, I like to share it. I think it'd be kind of cool if like everybody shared the books that they read and their take on it and what it means to them. Um, and for me, reading it has taken on like a new kind of form, where in my younger days, and I might go back to this, but I'm not sure. But most of my life I would just read a book all the way through and move on to another one. And these days I rarely do that. In fact, I start so many books that perhaps it might take my entire life to finish reading them all. I started a new book this morning, actually. I got home from work and I was listening to I was listening to a documentary on YouTube, because a lot of times when I'm at work I just plug into my headphones. And I was listening to a Jason Burmis documentary that he had done about the New World Order. And I've been kind of tripping on that stuff a little bit lately. Just the whole conspiracy realm and globalism and all that stuff. And to me, that's just kind of an interesting thing to read about. I don't necessarily believe all that I read, but there is a well-documented history of the beginnings of globalism, and as it's kind of come to fruition, it seems to be that that's where we're headed. I think you'd have to be kind of naive not to believe that at this point. Now, what form that takes, I mean, it's been planned for many years. But what it means and what the repercussions of it are remain to be seen for the most part. But I can imagine they're not especially good. I don't believe that the globalist authorities that are in place already have a whole lot of interest in like upholding the values of the founding of the United States, or individual liberty so much. But who knows? Maybe the people will stand up and take the power back, or at least exert some influence, and maybe there will be some negotiation. We can only hope. But let's see. Where was I going with that? Okay, so I started a new book because I was listening to the what's his name? David Burmis? I think it's David. David Burmis? Is that right? Okay. Well, I was listening to this documentary, and it got me. Well, he was talking about the Iran-Contra affair. And Jason Burmis, that's his name, Jason Burmis, not David. He was talking about the Iran-Contra affair. And it got me interested, because I remember when that was going on. And I remember back in, I think it was 1987 or 1988, during the summer, they televised the hearings. Which is interesting to me, because I've noticed that certain hearings get televised and some don't. They didn't televise the Ghislaine Maxwell hearings. like when she had her trial. For some reason, they didn't televise that, but they did televise the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So I'm wondering if they were just worried that too much information was going to get out. And speaking of the Ghislaine Maxwell case, I just recently watched Glenn Beck's interview with Whitney Webb, and I posted it on my social media, and I thought it was very interesting. There was a lot of information in a short span of time. I think it was about an hour and a half, maybe, interview, and they really just touched on a lot of subjects and went pretty in depth. She was pretty concise in her explanations. And according to the reading I've done about the global elite and just the conspiracy type stuff that I've read, she was right on the money. She knew about. She made mention of how Catherine Austin Fitts had discovered the $21 trillion that went missing from the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is where she worked. She was the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she had discovered a ton of money that went missing, and found out as well that trillions of dollars also went missing from the Department of Defense that would have been the boomers' pensions and everything, and maybe the money went into space exploration, I think, is her theory on it. But so Whitney Webb made mention of her, and which was interesting because I've been listening to a lot of interviews and stuff with Catherine Austin Fitts. She's a very interesting character, and so I enjoyed listening to her interviews. She is the head of a journal called the Solari Report, and there's one edition of it called State of Our Currencies. She's a financial expert. She's I believe that she owns a business as she's a financial advisor, so an investment bank. She owned the investment bank, or maybe she's an investment banker. She's a financial advisor, and she used to work as Assistant Secretary of the Department of I can't even say it. The Department of Housing and Urban Development. So, and she did that under the Bush administration, and then she discovered a bunch of corruption, and she let it out. She exposed it. She was threatened. I guess they threatened her family. And she's living in Europe now, but she still speaks. She still gets out there, and she'll speak in front of people and talk about all this stuff. And I would highly recommend listening to what she has to say. She's an expert. She's a financial expert. So I bought Whitney Webb's book, and here it is, One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1. I will order Volume 2 after I finish this one. Could take a while because I'm reading a bunch of other books. And I started reading the book about, this morning, I started reading the book about the Iran-Contra affair. I downloaded a few of them, actually. Someone just messaged me a poop emoji. Shout out to Lana. She's always good for a good poop emoji. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this book by Whitney Webb. She's a very intelligent young lady. She knows her stuff, and I look forward to getting into it. And I think she talks about the Iran-Contra affair in her book as well. She made mention of that. And so what else have I been reading? I think I started another book yesterday or the day before. I was reading. I'm just going to kind of go backwards from today. I started reading Zbigniew Brzezinski. I can never say his name. Zbigniew Brzezinski. His book Between Two Ages, and it is sort of from what I gather from the introduction, it's sort of about the transition into the technotronic age, which is uh, this. I think it was written in the '60s, and it was sort of it talks about us sort of ushering into a new age of global diplomacy, um, where it talked about previous incarnations of global diplomacy and how now it's just the forms are changing because of technology. And I imagine that it goes into technocracy. He calls it the technotronic era or something like that. Um, but I imagine there's things in there about technocracy and the whole new world order thing, because he was part of all that. He was in the CFR and uh, Trilateral Commission, all that stuff, Bilderberg Group. So he's in all those elite groups that kind of trickle down from the there's the Council on Foreign Relations, and then there is the Trilateral Commission, which is sort of it's like an elite the elite group behind the elite group. So there's these big elite groups. I think the CFR has like 4,000 members, and then there's like a smaller elite group, which is like the elite of the elite, and that would be like the Trilateral Commission, and then there's the elite of the elite of the elite, and that would be the Bilderberg Group. So I think that Zbigniew Brzezinski was sort of part of all of that. He was in all those elite groups, so he would be one of the highest powerful people in the world if he had lived. But he's dead now, so he is equal. Finally, he's not elite anymore. He's equal with all the other dead motherfuckers, and so hopefully he is, having his justice served in some way. What else have I been reading? I started Henry Kissinger's Diplomacy, which ties in with Zbignev's book. Um, Again, global diplomacy, global. He's another guy who is in all those groups. Henry Kissinger. If you want to know and understand the global elite mind, you read books by Henry Kissinger and Zbig. What else have I started reading? I've done some. I went back to. I finally ordered my own copy of this. I was just getting copies from the library, and I had a PDF version of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Been reading this. I finally read the part where he killed the two wenches. And so the murder scene was pretty brutal. He killed two bitches with an axe. One of them with the blunt side, one of them with the sharp side. The sister got it right in the forehead with the sharp side of the axe, just like the worst Friday the 13th kind of movie you can imagine. When Raskolnikov committed these murders in Crime and Punishment, he ran into some problems right away. Someone came to the door, and he chained the door shut, and so they knew that the killer was in there at the time. Like, they had suspected that someone had broke in and actually killed the women, and it turns out they were right. He was able to hide in, like, there was an apartment downstairs where some people were doing some painting, and they went on their lunch break or whatever, and he kind of hid in there while they were running up and down the stairs. And right away there was some foul play that was suspected, and so I imagine he's going to have a really rough time of trying to shake the trail to the murders and to get away with it. So that's where I got in that book. I was reading Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. I picked that one up again, and that's kind of an interesting book. I don't really know a whole lot about Ayn Rand and her philosophy and everything. I've heard a lot of people on the left like to say she's like a fascist or something, which I can't really imagine that that's true. I think she seems to be like an individualist, I think from what I heard, she is one of the founders and leading authorities on like libertarianism, but I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't know why she's viewed as a fascist. I haven't seen any hints of fascism in her writing at this point. It seems like she's just kind of about individualism and the Fountainhead. The main theme of the Fountainhead is this main character. His name's Howard Rourke, and he is a. It starts out that he gets expelled. Like in the first scene of the book, he gets expelled from. He's going to a architecture school, and he gets expelled because his ideas are unconventional. Maybe this is where it ties in, maybe a little bit with fascism, is that he's into modernism, and that's his approach, is this modernistic approach, which the fascists were modernists. So maybe that's why it seems like a really loose connection, if any. I don't think that being a modernist would necessarily make you a fascist, but there seems to be like an exaltation of modernism in this book. And so, but I think more than anything, the modernism is just sort of incidental to the character of Howard Rourke. That's his personal taste, and that's what he likes. And so this guy's a very talented, sort of underrated talent in his school, and the establishment hates him because he doesn't conform to traditionalism in architecture, and all his teachers tell him he's never going to work and no one's ever going to like his stuff, and he doesn't care because he's really in it for the art. He's just really into it for its own sake and doesn't care about whether or not he earns a living at it, doesn't care about whether he gets hired and has a career. And in the book, his roommate, who he stays with, is a guy named Peter Keating, who is also at the school, and he graduates with like the highest of honors, and he's like the valedictorian. He's the total Chad, and so Howard Rourke's staying at Peter Keating's house, and there's this early confrontation with the mom. Like, Peter Keating's kind of a mama's boy. His mom sort of tells him what to do, even though he's this kind of, this Chad guy who, like, he's like Mr. like overachiever and everything, and he graduates at the top of his class. His mom kind of tells him what to do, and he can't make any decisions without her. And he also seems to not be able to make any decisions without consulting his sort of low-key friend, Howard Rourke, the main character. Excuse me. And so, like, he's always asking for Howard Rourke's advice, and whenever he gets stuck on a project, he's always asking for Howard Rourke to sort of get him out of it, to solve the problem for him. But in a lot of ways, he thinks he's better because he's going to have success, because he's kind of a sellout. He's in it for the money. He's in it to do what he has to do to make his career something really fantastic. And the main character, Howard Rourke, he is someone with a lot of integrity. I've mentioned before in a past stream that he's kind of like the very beginning of the book is a lot like Catcher in the Rye. Like, when you read Catcher in the Rye, I think, doesn't Holden Caulfield get expelled from his school as well? And like at the very beginning, he's kind of like watching the graduation from a distance and kind of going, fuck those people, I hate this school, I'm gonna go, back home. And it's in the Atlantic, whatever, the Atlantic Northeast, what do you call it, New England. It's sort of like a New England setting, kind of like Catcher in the Rye. And so, and this character, he's a lot like Holden Caulfield in that he's an individualist. He hates anything that smacks of fakery. He's all about just being himself and doesn't care about anything else, doesn't care about his career, doesn't care about what people think of him. He just kind of like looks right through people like they don't exist. And he sort of intimidates people. And so that's kind of what's going on there in the Fountainhead, in the early part of the Fountainhead. I've listened to the audio book of it, like up through probably about 100 pages into it. And it gets more interesting as it goes, but until I actually read it, I'm not going to really talk about that. But, I will say that there's sort of the parallel lives of Howard Rourke and Peter Keating. And Peter Keating gets everything sort of handed to him, and Howard Rourke kind of just makes his own way. He kind of does everything on his own terms, and he ends up, he gets the girl, and he, at least for his own pleasure, and he gets a job and all this stuff. He works for the guy he wants to work for, and he just does things on his own terms, and he doesn't care really about anything, it seems, other than being, having integrity. I think that seems to be like his highest value, is the integrity of the art that he's chosen. And he loves architecture, and he does it on his own terms. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling about that one, but I am going to stop the tape for a bit, and I don't like these programs to get too long, because I get that kung fu movie effect where I'm moving my lips and the sound is kind of off from it, and I know that can be distracting. And that happens when my programs are too long, because I have a janky system. But anyway, I will stop the tape here. Okay. So what else? So this book, Stephen King, Drawing of the Three. I've read this a few times. This is actually, I think, my third time through it. And I'm just kind of on the first chapter. I just bought this from Half Price Books. So this one starts out... Okay, well, if you ever read the first... This is the second installment of the Dark Tower series. It's a very popular series. It's kind of like Stephen King's version of Lord of the Rings. It's his magnum opus. The very first one is one of my favorite books of all time, actually, The Gunslinger. And it's, The Gunslinger has its own charm. And as the Dark Tower series progresses, it kind of becomes cheesier and cheesier. Sort of like Star Wars. The Gunslinger is like the original Star Wars movie. And everything after it just progressively gets more cheesy and more like kid-friendly and more politically correct. Stephen King, by the way, I'm very disappointed in him as a human being, actually. He's always on Twitter. He's got like total Trump derangement syndrome and won't shut up about like Donald Trump. He just constantly tweets about Donald Trump, which is the most annoying thing ever. It's just really disappointing, because I grew up really admiring Stephen King and his books. I like everything that Stephen King did up through, like, say, maybe Misery. Or this book, Drawing of the Three, is not too bad. This is maybe one of his last good books. What year was this actually released? Looks 1987. Yeah, that's about it. Same year as Misery. So, 1987 was the end, I think, for Stephen King. I think It might have came out that same year. With It, yeah. I hate to say he jumped the shark with It, but once he got to the point to where, like, Pennywise was a big turtle or something like that, it just got really dumb at some point. Once you get to the end of it and you realize what it is, it just goes too far. It's too long, and it's just very self-indulgent work. And it has some cool parts about it. There's cool things about the story. The very first TV rendition that they tried to film of this, they made like a little 2-part miniseries with John Ritter and the guy from Night Court, Harry from Night Court, and who else was in it? Annette O'Toole was in it, and it had some good actors. I mean, Tim Curry was in it. Even Tim Curry couldn't save that movie. It was so terrible. It was such a cheese. And John Boy Walton played the main character. Oh my god, it was terrible. It was really bad, really bad. And a lot of people say that people who were like little kids when that movie came out said it was really scary, but I was a teenager when it came out, and I thought it was fucking dumb. And the new one's a lot better. But there's a lot of things I don't like about the story. But anyway, to make a long story short here, I think Stephen King was done in 1987. I think Misery was like his last good book. Drawing of the Three was pretty good. you know, obviously Carrie's good. The Shining is incredible. I mean, like all those Cujo and Firestarter were. Um, Tommyknockers was pretty terrible. I think that might have been '87. He come out with like 5 books that year. Tommyknockers was pretty terrible. I mean, that was just the end of it. The end of his creativity. Salem's Lot was great. I love that one. So I really liked the early years of Stephen King. The Stand was amazing. You know, like he just couldn't go wrong for a while. Everything he did was great. Creepshow was like the pinnacle for him, like 1982. I think that was about the same time he did Cujo. But Drawing of the Three starts out right where the Gunslinger leaves off. And one thing I'll say about the Gunslinger is that it's kind of like Louis L'Amour in a way, but meets like, I don't want to say meets Star Wars because it's not like a space thing. It is future, but it's like so far in the future that it's become like the remote past. It's like to where like civilization has kind of already crumbled and the world is reverting back to like a sort of pre-technology kind of life where people sort of live like the Amish, you know, or they live like, you know, the Old West. And but it's like buried under the ground are like fossils of machines that were like you know, pieces of technology buried underground that show a history of technology, but it's like an ancient civilization almost. And sort of the world's just kind of moved on. Everybody just kind of drinks and gets drunk and screws. And you know, there's a guy who, you know, his job is to shoe the horses and everything. And so it's kind of gone back to that time. And through the whole thing, he is trying to, during that first book, he's trying to, he is chasing after the Man in Black. And it doesn't really say really who he is so much, but at the end of the book, it's revealed that he's this sorcerer. Well, I mean, through the whole book, you kind of know he's a sorcerer because he sort of pulls some like black magic shit along the way. And, you know, he can change his appearance and do different things. And for some reason, he's able to survive out in the desert without any food or without much. And he definitely gives the Gunslinger a run for his money when he goes to sort of follow him around or chase him through the desert. And in the end, he finally catches up to him, but not before he sacrifices the boy, which is, he finds a boy out in the desert, which is sort of a trap that's laid by the Man in Black. It's kind of complicated, but he sort of pulls him out of like our world and brings him he pushes him in front of a car. The kid dies and sort of gets teleported into the Gunslinger's world. And really the ultimate search with the Gunslinger is for the Dark Tower, which is sort of the hub of like all the dimensions. And there is a problem in the Dark Tower, and there's all these sort of like holes in between the dimensions where people could slip through into other dimensions. And so it's kind of like Swiss cheese in a way. And so he is drawn to the Dark Tower, and I don't know if he's going there to fix it. I never really got that far. I think I got to volume 5, which was Wolves of the Kala. And again, I mean, once it got to that book, it just got so ridiculous I couldn't really keep going. I just couldn't keep up with the story anymore. I thought Wizard and Glass was just ridiculous. It was like a romance novel. It was really cheesy, like the lingo in it, like everything. Just, and he even went back and tried to rewrite the Gunslinger. Like he had like an abridged version, which I tried to read that, and it just made it horrible. He tried to, what he tried to do was include all the things that later became developments in the story. As you know, the very first book was very simple, just like Star Wars, and then after Wizard and Glass, it got to like Jar Jar Binksville and just all this stupid shit going on. And then he had to go back and change the original story to sort of fit the continuity that he had developed over time. So it's almost like making Greedo shoot first. And so it was just a bunch of dumb shit. And I didn't like it. But I've read The Gunslinger like 4 times, 5 times maybe. I read it in Dutch. That's how much of a nerd I am. I use that book in order to teach myself how to at least read in Dutch, and so I translated the book, and that's how I, gained the Dutch vocabulary that I have. So a lot of the words I know are words that revolve around that story, which is kind of funny. Um, but anyway, in the drawing of the three, the second one, which he's still on a good track here. The story hasn't gotten really cheesy yet. It starts out that he's on this beach where he just spoke with the man. Okay, at the end of the gunslinger, he spoke with the man in black. The man in black gave him like a tarot reading with tarot cards, and made Roland, the gunslinger, fall asleep. And he was, it was like a Rip Van Winkle kind of thing where he slept for like 10 years, and he woke up on the beach like 10 years older. And the first thing that happens at the beginning of the drawing of the three is he is sort of like uh, he finds himself sort of out in the water, and I don't know if he'd woken up. I mean, he didn't wake up 10 years later in the water. I think that he woke up 10 years later, like under a tree or something, and then he went to the beach, and he kind of fell asleep on the beach. This time, not for 10 years, but he sort of woke up in the water with the waves hitting him, and there was this huge like crab kind of lobster kind of monstrosity on the beach that was attacking him, and it like the very first thing it did was it like tore off like his index finger and his middle finger of his like, I mean, the guy's a gunslinger. I mean, his main like raison d'etre in life is drawing guns and shooting guns like the old west, and so it takes his trigger finger off his right hand. It's like the very first thing that happens in the story, and then the thing like takes a chunk out of his calf and then bites off one of his toes. And so, like, right off the bat, he's completely disadvantaged. That's how the story begins, with the gunslinger becoming highly disadvantaged. He's 10 years older. His guns got all wet, and his bullets got wet. And he's, like, in this other world, so he's not going to get more bullets. So, like, half of his bullets are ruined. He loses his trigger finger and his middle finger, so his right hand is virtually useless. And not only that, but this thing that attacks him is poisonous, and so it's like it basically injected him full of venom, and so he's throughout the story he's like sick for, it's like you getting bit by a rattlesnake, basically. And so he has to find a way to sort of fend off this affliction that he's got, this multiple affliction that he's got going on from the start. And so in consequence, he's not really the main character so much in the drawing of the three. What the drawing of the three is talking about like drawing like you're drawing cards. Remember how I said that when he caught up with the man in black, whose name was Martin, I think, was that his name? Was it Martin? He gave him a tarot reading, so the drawing of the cards, and it's the three cards, and they were like these kind of tarot trumps, basically. One of them was called the Prisoner, one of them was called the Lady of Shadows, and I think the other one was called was it the Sailor or the Doorway or something. But what ends up happening is that after Roland gets his fingers bit off and everything, he kind of walks down the beach a little bit, and right there in the middle of the beach is just a door, just out of nowhere, just a complete anomaly, just this door on the beach. And I guess he opens the door, and this is from memory now because like I just kind of read the first chapter. When he opens the door, he sort of sees through the eyes of this guy who's like a heroin addict living in our world, and the guy, he's like wanted by the mafia and all this stuff. And so what ends up happening, he walks through the door and finds himself inside the body, sort of cohabitating the body with this drug addict. And he actually, I think he feel, I can't remember whether or not he feels the heroin withdrawals that this guy's going through and sort of experiences it with him. I can't actually remember, but I know that at some point he gains control over part of this guy's body, like maybe just his left side or something. And he sort of acts through this through this other man in this other world. And so, and along the way, they pick up another character who is this woman in a wheelchair who has a split personality. She's got like dissociative identity disorder because of like abuse that she had gone through as a child. And so she's just a really nasty person to have to deal with. And eventually she gets reconciled in the end. And so that one's kind of an interesting book. And I'll talk probably more about that in further streams. Let's see, what else? I've been reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The main text I've been reading from is the abridged version. Because the book is actually in like 3 volumes. This is Gulag Archipelago. It's in like 3 volumes and it's like over 1,000 pages, like 1,500 pages or something. And so I bought the what I thought was the complete thing. I ordered it off of Amazon, and when it came, it was like the whole thing, like all the way through, was only about 400 to 500 pages. And so it's an abridged version of the Gulag Archipelago. And so I started reading it, and I got about 100 pages into it, and then I started reading the complete version. And I think I listened to the complete version on audio, not all the way through, but I had downloaded some of it and chopped it up and put it on my iPod so I could listen to it at work. And so I was listening to the Gulag Archipelago at work. And I hate audiobooks. I hate audiobooks because I could never get around the narrator. Like, I could never get past the character of the person's voice who's reading it. And it's just really distracting to me. And I have to go back and listen to it over and over again because I'm a terrible listener. And so, so I'm reading 2 separate versions of the Gulag Archipelago currently, and that's my main bitch right now, is that book. And so I've been reading like the abridged version, and then I'm going back and supplementing it with the complete version. And so that's one I'm trying to get through. Tragedy and Hope is another one I've been reading, which is Carol Quigley's book that talks about how the central banks sort of manipulated global affairs in the 20th century through both world wars. And then there is the book The Anglo-American Establishment, where it talks about who these people are and how they came to be. And it talks about how this very rich person, Englishman named Cecil Rhodes, of the Rhodes Scholar fame, started a secret society. And this is who, when people say the Illuminati, this is who they're talking about. Because Cecil Rhodes was a very rich person who developed a network and sort of inner circle, sort of roundtable group that was based around like sort of imperialist England, where they would go to South Africa and start a colony. They would go to India and start a colony. And so they started all these colonies all over the world, and he was starting wars in these countries where he was colonizing, like in South Africa. They had colonized South Africa, and he actually started a war there, and there was a huge genocide. So, I mean, these people are some of the most evil, disgusting people on the planet in history, and most people don't even know about them. And they started the central banks. And so this goes back even further to the Rothschilds, and sort of Cecil Rhodes is sort of a product of that environment. And he developed his own circle and his own social networking, where he basically brought in the richest of his richest friends, and they arranged marriages. And it's probably a lot of I think I mentioned this before, there's probably a lot of inbreeding going on, but all the richest families. And this started in England but ended up kind of moving to the States with the Rockefellers and some of these people. So the Rockefellers are in this line as well. And Cecil Rhodes, when he died, he actually left his estate, not to his family, but to this inner circle. And his estate was I mean, his massive estate, like billions of dollars, um, were dedicated to this system, and what he wanted to do was develop a new world order, and they had basically tentacles in every uh, aspect of life in all these different countries. So everywhere that England had their footprint, he had these sort of emissaries that he had sent there, and he had them working in government, he had them working in education, he had them working in the media, the newspapers, everything. And so they sort of just had their tentacles all over the world. And these people eventually started the League of Nations, which became the United Nations. So all of this goes back to Cecil Rhodes. And so this is, for all intents and purposes, this Illuminati that people speak about. A lot of people think it doesn't exist. It actually does exist, and it still exists today. And if you look at I spoke earlier about the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group. So this goes all the way back to this group. And it's always been this group. So they've had their inner circle. And of course, these people died, but they passed it on to somebody else. And so they chose their successors. And there's always been money in it. And the reason why Carroll Quigley was able to write about this stuff, he wasn't actually part of this group, but he was sort of hired to write their history and was given access to their libraries and all of their documents and everything. And so he, over the course of several years, came to understand a lot of this stuff, and he wrote their history for them. But I don't know that necessarily he was supposed to publish all of it. I think at one point he was scared of releasing the Anglo-American establishment because it gave all the names. It was like the White Pages. I mean, this book is about as boring as the White Pages when you try and read it. But this book is like the White Pages of the Illuminati. And so they didn't want this information necessarily out. And so that one was actually published posthumously because he was scared. He didn't want to get killed over this. And so even when he released Tragedy and Hope, there was all this fuckery going on with the publisher. Like they had destroyed the plates or lost the originals or something, and they tried to actually condense this 1,300 page book down to like a 300 page sort of, like the Reader's Digest version that was sort of a cleaned up version that was okay for normal people to read, but it didn't have all the good stuff. But eventually the good stuff came out. And so despite the efforts of these shadow groups, the information did get out. And Carroll Quigley actually, he sympathized with these people. He wasn't writing this book as like an accusation, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It's actual history of these people, and he agreed with them on a lot of the stuff. And so, he thought that this new world order was great. And so he was a proponent of it, an apologist of it, in fact. And so it gets pretty boring. His writing style is pretty sucky. Like it's thorough, but it's boring. It's not entertaining, but it has all the information. And so anybody who's interested in learning about the global elite, who's running this world, how this world works, because these people were the ones who were funding the world wars. And so these were the central bankers. These were the people that had countries and governments in their pocket. And when one country was so far in debt to them, they wanted to have some say-so on the policy of that country. And if that country didn't pull through, well, then they would pit another country against them. And so that's how a lot of these conflicts began. And so, the real story of the world wars, it can be better understood having read this book all the way through, which I haven't done. I haven't read the book all the way through, but I've read a lot of it. And then there is this book, which I've already spoken of, Tragedy and Hope 101. And this is just sort of a distillation of Tragedy and Hope by this other writer, Joseph Plummer. So he just breaks down the basics of the contents of Tragedy and Hope, and just talks about the. It's a little bit out of order. It's not in the same order. He kind of almost takes it backwards. He's talking about sort of the Woodrow Wilson era. You know, it focuses a lot on that, and like Edward Mandell House. Edward Mandell House. Can't remember the guy's name. It's not even the right book. But let's see, what else? What other books do I want to talk about? There's one story I wanted to talk about. I had one episode where I spoke about Thomas Ligotti, his what was it, Nyctalops or whatever it was called, that short story. Thomas Ligotti, he's sort of this suspense kind of horror writer, sort of a what's his name? A little bit like Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, he's of the 90s, but he writes in a really old style. Uh-oh. My alarm's going off. Okay. So, my favorite story from, what do you call it? Thomas Ligotti. My favorite story from Thomas Ligotti is a story called The Gas Station Carnivals. And I will talk about that in a minute. I'm going to cut the tape. I'm going to cut a fart, and then I'm going to cut the tape. Oh, yeah. Okay, so The Gas Station Carnivals by Thomas Ligotti. I'm going to do this completely from memory. It's been a while since I read this one. The story starts out, there's this guy, he's kind of sitting in a sort of an artsy bar, kind of cabaret. The Crimson Cabaret, I think that's what it's called. And he's having a shitty day, like his stomach is just killing him. He's got like this food poisoning or something. He's just kind of sitting there sipping his tea. And his buddy comes in and he sits down and he's like, wow, man, you know, you really let that lady have it the other day. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you don't remember? You insulted this woman who owns this bar. He's like, you got a lot of nerve coming in this bar because you insulted the lady who owns it. And I guess supposedly they were at some art show or this party, and he insulted the lady's art and called her an untalented hack or something like that. And he's like, man, you got a lot of nerve coming in here, showing your face in here after saying that to her, man. She was pretty upset, after you dissed her out like that in front of everybody. And he doesn't seem to have any memory of it. And his friend goes, I was just thinking about you the other day because you're a writer and everything, and you write all these weird stories. He's all, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. He's like, I got this weird memory from my childhood. Like he's like, it's just something that kind of comes up every now and then. He's like, do you remember like how they used to have like these gas station carnivals? And his friend's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, on the side of the road, like you'd be on some cross country trip with your parents or whatever, and you'd pull over to get gas, and there'd be a gas station there, but there's kind of like a carnival attached to it. And his friend's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, come on, man, you know what I'm talking about, the gas station carnivals, man, come on. And he goes on to describe these experiences that he had when he was a kid, where he would take these trips with his parents, and they'd be in the car for a long time, and his dad would stop to get gas, but then they'd go in, there'd be like a carnival ride, but kind of like a broken down one, and you could kind of pay to sort of like a little bit extra, or like if you bought enough gas, they would give you like a free ticket to this carnival that was attached to the gas station, like out in like Provo, Utah or something, so you'd go to this gas station, and then you check out the carnival while you were there. And so they'd have maybe a ride, like a busted down ride, but so you couldn't actually go on the ride, but you just maybe like pose for a picture on it, or maybe there would be like just a section of a roller coaster, and you kind of go in and sit on it, but there's like grass growing around it, like it's totally out of commission, kind of carnival stuff. that they would have as this sort of attachment to a gas station. And so he said there was one thing I always like remembered was that there would be like, like a sideshow. That was my favorite one. I mean, that was the one that made the biggest impression on me, was the sideshow. And he's telling his friend about this. They're in this cafe. It's raining outside. Whatever. The one guy had dissed out the lady owner of the club. And his friend's telling him about this gas station carnival. And he's saying, yeah, I used to go into the sideshow, and I'd go into the back, and there would be a tent, this makeshift kind of setup, and there would be like these sideshows that were put on by like gas station attendants, like wearing costumes. And he's like, okay, now this is getting out of control. Like, your story here is really far-fetched, man. Like, I don't remember gas station carnivals, for one, much less one where like the gas pumper guy is going in and acting like the hypnotist or whatever. Like, they would have a featured like freak or whatever, and he would wear these costumes and stand up on a little like stage with some just like an extension cord running to a lamp to light up the stage, and it was really cheap, and there would be like a bench that was kind of like busted, and you'd sit in there with your parents and watch this thing, and it would last for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then you'd go back in the car and head further down the road. And so he said there was one that was, that always, to me, was the worst one. And I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was basically like this guy who would stand with his back to the audience with like this top hat on, with like this cloak, and he would kind of like barely turn his head and like kind of threaten to show you his face, but like you never saw his face. I think they called him like that. I don't want to say the Mad Hatter, but basically this guy just kind of standing there and it's like totally still. And it just freaked him out really bad because he never saw the guy's face. And he was always scared. When he was a kid, he was scared the guy would turn around and show his face, and it would just be so horrible that he would just lose his mind. And I mean, he'd have like these little tufts of red hair coming out the side and just kind of barely move his head to the side so that from behind where the audience was, he could kind of see hints of what the guy might start to look like. But he knew all along it was just some gas station attendant with like a costume on. But it just freaked him out for some reason. And his parents would kind of like almost kind of nudge him forward, like, hey, Junior, watch this, and like they were almost kind of in on it. Like they wanted him to go crazy. And so he's talking about these memories. And so this main guy, he's like, dude, I don't have time for your stories, man. I got this stomach bug right now. Like, I'm just trying to sip my tea. Just, man, like, take your story and get out of here. And the guy says, you know what, man? I know what your problem is, man. You're under like this art magic spell. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, man, there's this art magic that exists, and there's this force in this town that's gonna put it on all of us, and you've got it right now with your stomach bug. That's why you're not feeling well. That's why last night you were talking crap about that lady's artwork and all this stuff, and as it turned out, like, it was really like the other guy, the guy who's telling him the story, who was the one that insulted her. And so the reality started kind of crumbling around the situation to where nobody really knew who insulted who. And like the guy, his friend went up to take a piss, and like he was sitting there drinking his tea, and he was going to order another bottle, another glass of wine for his friend, but he saw his wine glass was gone, and it turns out the guy was never even there. So like there really was this kind of spell that was sort of casting a gloom over like the whole community. There's this sort of like little art community. I don't know, it's just kind of a weird story, but the whole idea of the gas station carnivals, like, to me, was like, when I first read it, that was the first story I read by Thomas Ligotti. And I might get a little bit more into this later, as maybe I'll reread it and try and figure it out a little bit, but there's parts missing from the story. But yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of dumb, but like, to me, I thought it was kind of a cool story. Let's see what else. I'm kind of looking in my closet right now because I got some books there. What else have I been reading? Oh, I did order Alex Jones's book. And what is it called? The Great Reset, or is it called or is it called the New World Order? It's called like the Great Reset, I think. And it's pretty much all about Klaus Schwab. I read a little bit of Klaus Schwab's book, Fourth Industrial Revolution, and when you read the book, you basically have to decode it because it's written in this sort of leftist, like super jargon, like buzzword, like word salad kind of thing. He basically just uses words like equity and diversity and talks about the climate and just like all the icky buzzwords that leftists use all the time. And so when you read the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it's just so souped up in this. Like he basically spills out his agenda, but it's kind of written in code, so you have to decode the book. And so Alex Jones's book does exactly that. He basically just decodes, the utterances of Klaus Schwab in this book. And I'm honestly a little bit disappointed with Alex Jones's book. I thought it was going to give like this rich history of like, and it might further down the road, but I thought it was going to give this really rich like sort of conspiratorial history of the United States or the world, and the world thing. But there's other books for that. I mean, like I mentioned, Carol Quigley. I mean, like that's the most comprehensive, basically conspiracy Bible that you can read. I've been reading a little bit of history. What else? A little bit of Soviet history. Let's see. I've ordered some books off of Amazon recently, and one of the ones I ordered, I don't think I have it around here, is Thomas Sowell's book on Marxism. And I started reading Bertrand Russell's book on Bolshevism. Let's see. I'm gonna cut the tape and grab a couple of books out of my closet and see what I can find. Yeah, I didn't really find anything great in there. Mark Levin's book, American Marxism. Been reading that. So then there's Thomas Sowell's book on Marxism. Like I said, Bertrand Russell's, I can't remember the exact title of it, Bolshevism something, which is interesting because he is a sort of a Bolshevist apologist. He sympathized. He's a Bolshevist sympathizer. But he didn't like the way that it was manifested in the Soviet Union. So he went to the Soviet Union. This is Bertrand Russell now. He wanted to study the phenomenon of Bolshevism. So he went to the Soviet Union, and once he got there, he started seeing sort of like how mismanaged and sort of misguided the revolution had gone over there, and how the Soviet system was very corrupt. And so he wasn't a fan of Soviet communism, but he believed in like Bolshevism as a theory, and that it could be done properly. And he just thought that the Russians were doing it wrong. So that's one I plan on getting a little bit more into. Another one I got in there is Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. I've been reading a little bit of that. Basically, it just kind of breaks down the market system and how free markets are a preferable system to any sort of system of like top-down control. And Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, is really a good. They're good books to read side by side. Like because I'm reading that one too. I've got like 40 books I'm reading. So like when you read Thomas Sowell's Capitalism and Freedom, or no, sorry, that's Milton Friedman's book. Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics. he basically talks about how the free market system is the best system, because basically anytime you try to have like price caps and then price floors, and you start trying to manipulate the economy in those ways, you wind up with shortages and uh, with surpluses, and like what the nature of surpluses and shortages, what they actually are, how they affect the economy, and how really the best thing to do is just kind of leave it the fuck alone and let the market take care of itself. And so that's the essence of capitalism, in the sense that it's understood by Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell, who was sort of a disciple of Milton Friedman. And his books are really good. He's got a lot of really good books. I plan on reading more from those guys. I don't know. I guess that's about it. Let's see. I've got some notes here that I took from a couple of books. I've got some notes from Stranger in a Strange Land, which is kind of interesting. I kind of found these laying around. What is this? Okay. So, what do I have on Stranger in a Strange Land? Okay, it's a story about a Martian, Valentine Smith. Actually, a man. I'm reading this off my notes, by the way. Valentine Smith is actually a man, but he lived among the Martians on planet Mars. His parents were from Earth, raised by a race of indigenous. He was raised by a race of indigenous Martians who don't have sex. The only surviving member of an expedition to Mars led by Elon Musk. Not really led by Elon Musk. After the moon, they went to Mars. Parents were scientists who were selected according to their professions in the academic field. They didn't want to send some bums into outer space, so they sent these academics, and they sent them on a voyage called the Envoy. 8 people, 4 couples. Envoy kept in contact via satellite until one day before their landing on Mars. Then contact ceased. 25 years later, an unmanned drone was sent, reporting images of some modern infrastructure in ruins. Apparently, World War III happened here in the meantime on Earth. Eventually, a new voyage, the Champion, launched. This time an all-male crew, headed by Captain Von Tromp. Champion reported back. Envoy located no survivors. But there was one, the son of 2 travelers, also reported Mars is inhabited. Then they located Valentine. Okay, so when Valentine arrived back on Earth, Captain Von Tromp imposed heavy restrictions on any public or media access to Valentine. Much to the consternation of all parties involved. He meant to protect Valentine from... Okay, so, much to the consternation of all parties involved. And those parties were the Secretary General, the Peace Minister, the Science Minister, professors and doctors, and the Federation High Council, High Ministers for Peace and Security, Minister of Public Information. So those are all the sort of elites that were trying to get access to Valentine once he came back to Earth. And this Von Tromp guy, who headed the Champion voyage, was sort of protecting Valentine from all these people because he needed to sort of physically rehabilitate. He was sort of a pile of mush, and he kind of needed to sort of like physically get his strength back. Okay, so when Valentine arrived, Captain Von Tromp imposed heavy restrictions on the public or media. He meant to protect Valentine from any impediments to physical recovery in a hospital. Public information minister wanted to put pressure on to show Smith to the public. Public information minister wanted to put pressure on to show Smith to the public to keep them from rioting, since they'd promised to bring back a Martian. So there was this sort of public demand. Everybody wanted to see the man from Mars. And so this Von Trump guy was like, no, we're not going to let this out yet. We're not going to let anybody have access to him. No media, no press. And the public information minister was like, no, we need to give the people what they want. So these people are going to riot if we don't show them something. So let's show them to the public. Meantime, Smith was busy adapting to his new environment on Earth. So he was in the hospital, basically, lifting pencils and stuff, trying to. I mean, basically, he was like a baby. I mean, he didn't have any. I imagine he would have been vulnerable to diseases and stuff, but they had to protect him for a while. In describing the physiognomy of his condition, reference was made to his third level and second level as perhaps a mode of mentally controlling his otherwise involuntary functions. Okay, so he could control, like, maybe his heartbeat and stuff like that. He also didn't fear death the way most humans do, and that was from sort of the cultural adoption from the indigenous Martians that he was raised with. They didn't fear death. Von Trump had ordered that no women were to be visiting Valentine. Why? He had never seen a woman. Would it be too upsetting for him? Whenever someone would speak to him, he would labor to decode what they were saying. So he didn't really understand English. And so he kind of had to like sit there and sort of translate it in his head, basically. He would labor to decode what they were saying, trying to grok their intention. So there was a verb in the book, grok. I had to grok what he meant, which means to sort of to suss it out, to figure it out, to grok. It's one thing I hate about like old science fiction. It's so cheesy. They have to make up dumb words like that. He was basically a big baby at this point. A guy came into his room disguised as an orderly to try to secure a book deal with Smith, try to get him to sign a contract or leave a thumbprint on some meager contract. Yeah, so he's like, dude, I'll give you $5,000, dude, if I could have your story. And he was like dressed up like one of the hospital orderlies. Jill is introduced in this next chapter. Jill, she's a nurse at the hospital where Smith was being kept. Was stated that her hobby was men, so she was a whore. She was a strumpet. As soon as she heard he had never seen a woman before, of course that just like, she couldn't wait to be the first one. She was on the case, ready to make her move. She tried to get in to see Smith via one of the doctors with whom she already had a date. So she was already banging one of the doctors. She had another boyfriend who was like a journalist. He didn't let her in. She sneaked around back from a different room on the other side, of course. Of course she did. A woman always finds a way into a big old cack. So she walks in the room and introduces herself. She offers him some water. I wish she'd offer me some water. Which gets him all excited for her to offer him water. Because remember, he's from Mars. Okay, they don't have a lot of water there. So if she is offering him water, that's a really big deal. On a very spiritual level for him. For Martians, the sharing of water creates a deep and abiding bond between two. Even he knew she was trekking to get closer. So then they share the water. he considered her his water brother because he didn't understand the difference between males and females because they didn't have sex on Mars. Um, so he didn't know. Yeah, as far as women were concerned, like he was genuinely curious about her because she was very, for a brother, she was very, very fair. One would say. He asked if she was a woman, so I guess he had heard of a woman and what that meant, creating for himself an awkward situation which he interpreted as life or death. So like his feels that got excited as a result of her boob brushing up against his arm was like a lot. He was like, what's happening to my special purpose? Like freaked him out. And of course she flirted with him. Of course she's like already sexually manipulating this guy before he's totally innocent. She's like basically molesting him. First suggesting she suggests that she take her clothes off, just as kind of a tease, just to kind of joke with him. And then taking a rain check on it. She's like, oh, well, maybe later. Like, should I take my clothes off for you? Oh, no, maybe later. Okay, so she's told prick tease, right? Later, she's at work thinking about him, and her boyfriend calls. He's the reporter. He wants to take her out for a steak. So he's like trying to be her sugar daddy. She responds, a real one? Like a real steak? Like they have the bug steaks already? Apparently most people eat fake meat in this future. And apparently she keeps a slut dress in her locker just for such emergencies. So he sends a self-flying taxi to pick her up, and it picks him up a few minutes later to conceal their meeting. And then I wrote to be continued. So that's the beginnings of Stranger in a Strange Land. What else we got? The Iliad. I took some notes on the Iliad. I had to take notes on the Iliad because I can't grok it. I can't grok the story without taking notes because it's just too convoluted. The quarrel. It starts out with the quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles. Okay, so Achilles' parents were Peleus and Thetis. Thetis was his mother, Peleus was his father. Agamemnon was the son of Atreus. And Agamemnon had a brother, and they kind of ruled the Achaeans together. Achilles' anger has resulted in the death and misery of many of his own people, the Achaeans, or Greeks. Agamemnon's? Wait. Okay, so this rivalry between Agamemnon and Achilles was orchestrated by none other than Apollo. Okay, and Apollo was the son of Jove and Leto. Leto was Apollo's mother. Jove was... No. I'm sorry. Wait. What? Jove was the father, and Leto was the mother. Or was it the other way around? Jove was the mother, Leto was the father of Apollo. I don't know. I've got it mixed up. Apollo was angry with King Agamemnon, so he sent a pestilence to plague. So I'm guessing he's a god. Apollo is a god, yeah. So he sent a pestilence to plague his people, Agamemnon's people, the Achaeans. Why? Because Agamemnon had dishonored Apollo's priest, namely Chryses. Chryses came to the ships of the Achaeans to ransom his daughter, bearing Apollo's wreath and scepter. Agamemnon and his brother were chiefs of the Achaeans, so Chryses blessed the army and begged the Achaeans for the release of his daughter with ransom, in the name of Apollo. The common Achaeans were all for the release of Chryses' daughter, but Agamemnon, a prick, was enraged. Of course he was enraged. He basically said, "Get away from my ships. Don't come back. Take your Apollonian trinkets and get lost. I'm keeping your daughter for the rest of her life. She'll spend the rest of her days spinning at her loom and sucking my dick." No, he didn't really say that, but that's what he meant. "So stop harassing me or I'm going to fuck you up." Agamemnon was keeping her at his house in Argos. Chryses left in fear. He didn't say a word, but went to the seashore and prayed to King Apollo. Apollo of Smynth, or is it Sminthy? Smythe? God of the silver bow, protects Chryse and the holy Scylla and rules Tenedos. Tenedos. Euros Tenedos, huh? Chryses prayed, "If I ever paid homage to you and performed ceremonies in your name, let your arrows avenge my tears upon the Danaans," who were the Achaeans, who were the Greeks, who were the army of Agamemnon. The Achaeans are the Danaans, also Argives, the Hellenes, all denote a Greek civilizational identity. Question: was Achilles actually a military leader under Agamemnon? Yes, I believe he was. Was he Agamemnon's own military commander of the Achaean army? Achilles' wrath is the central theme of the Iliad. That's what I wrote. Okay, so what is this? Iliad, research, whatever. Greek mythology. Peleus is a hero, king of Phthia, husband of Thetis, previous marriage to Antigone, who hung herself. Their only surviving offspring of 7 was Achilles. Thetis was a sea nymph. The Achaeans were the Greeks, also called the Danaans. Okay, so I've got a little bit of wiki here on Achilles. In the Iliad, Achilles' wrath is the central theme of the poem. The accursed rage that brought great suffering to the Achaeans only covers a few weeks of the decade-long war, begins with Achilles' withdrawal from battle after being dishonored by Agamemnon, commander of the Achaean forces. He took Chryseis as his slave. Apollo sends a plague amongst the Greeks. Draw a parallel between Agamemnon and Pharaoh from the Bible in Exodus. Okay, so like God kept hardening his heart, right? So Agamemnon's heart keeps getting hardened somehow. I don't know who's making his heart hard, but I don't know. The prophet Calchas correctly determines the source of the trouble, but is self-censoring and will not speak out unless Achilles vows to protect him. Calchas declares that Chryseis must be returned to her father Agamemnon. Calchas declares that Chryseis must be returned to her father. Agamemnon consents, but then commands that Achilles' battle prize Briseis must be brought to him to replace Chryseis. Briseis. Is it Briseis or Briseis? Briseis must be brought to him to replace Chryseis. This suggests that Agamemnon is actually punishing Achilles for daring to protect Calchas, a lowly prophet. That he would dare stand up to Agamemnon in Calchas' defense. At which point Achilles refuses to fight or lead his troops alongside the other Greek forces. Achilles prays to Thetis to convince Zeus to help the Trojans gain ground in the war. Achilles prays to Thetis to convince Zeus to help the Trojans gain ground in the war. That's their enemies. He wants their enemies to gain ground so that he can regain his honor. Yeah. So it's almost like he wants setbacks because he wants to show how badass he is, basically. He wants to control the set. He wants to demonstrate the status of his game, but also exercising his own will to let go of it, to let go of the target and risk losing it or proving determination. Yeah, this is all, I'm sort of putting it in sort of seduction terms here. Also, it seems like a bit of modern day treason to want to see your own country or military fail. Why didn't Agamemnon try him for treason? Is this merely a demonstration of his value or valor? Like when you stand up to your boss to gain ground in the workplace? Yeah, I'm sort of personalizing this. But yeah, that's it. I mean, that's all I've got for these notes I sort of found. I sometimes take notes on the stuff that I read. But anyway, my back hurts. I'm going to go. I got to go back to work here in a little bit. My back already hurts. So yeah, that's it. Just sort of like a rundown of different shit I've been reading. So yeah, hopefully some of it's interesting to you. Yeah, if not, oh well, maybe next time. Bye.